Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. Today I'm drinking, let's see, what am I drinking? I left the tag in. Ahmad tea, chamomile, and lemongrass. Yeah, I always get annoyed when other people leave their tea, the label dangling like that. But when it's my turn, I'm like, I'm so lazy. But this is a nice tea because it's one of those kind of boring sounding herbal teas, but sometimes we just need calming, relaxing, beneficial teas, right? Well, I had a pretty beneficial, long-ish month with Jane Austen in July, but it was good because, well, first of all, I love reading Jane Austen. I've said it before. Jane Austen is my favorite writer ever, I think, and I am one of those people who obviously isn't against rereading because I keep a lot of the books that I've read. It would not make sense if I never went back and reread anything. But I also own a lot of unread books, so I have to kind of balance out what I reread. So it was weird when I realized that half the books I read last month were rereads. And I'm okay with that because they were all good. And so sometimes it's just worth it. And July was I mean, I don't like the month of July. I've said it before. It's too always in New York, no matter what. It's hot and humid. There's been exceptions, but very rarely. You know it's going to be AC weather, air conditioning weather, and it was. And I was indoors most of the time with the air conditioning and the cats, and that's okay because it gave me time to read Jane Austen. And there were some really messed up things that happened in July that I won't get into here, but it was helpful to be reading something. I do book fell down. I do find it is very comforting to read Jane Austen, just as it's enjoyable anytime, but it is definitely comforting, which we'll get into in a minute. But let me just tell you about what I did. I've talked about this already in the TBR, but Jane Austen July is a yearly shindig that is put together by Katie at Books and Things and Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, and I think that's a great thing to organize. They do a whole bunch of other videos about Jane Austen and thereabouts, and it's great. And then other people do videos too. Things keep falling down. I keep hearing things falling down. I don't even think it's the cats. But anyway, so it makes it a really fun month. And just fills my TBR list full of things that I look forward to. So it makes me look forward to July. And I read 8 books. I almost read 9 books, but I just couldn't get to one of the books in time. And there is one book that I did not get very far in, so we'll get into that. The whole deal is to read, if you're joining Jane Austen July, all you really have to do is read a book by Jane Austen. So, that in itself, you can congratulate yourselves if you did that. But there's also a whole bunch of other incentives. Well, incentives, is that the word? Challenges, etc. And so I'll try to show you which ones I fulfilled or achieved or did this month. So there were 2, I guess, group reads on Goodreads. And there were 2 Jane Austen books written by Jane Austen. And so that was already a great idea. And the first one I read was Emma. And I hadn't read Emma in its entirety since 1993, I think. And so my whole expectation of it was that I would reread it and love it so much that it would finally get off its ranking as my least favorite of Jane Austen's main 6 novels. And I'm not doing a full-on ranking this year, I don't think, of all of them. I might do it next year. Because I did one last year. I don't want to do it every year, maybe. Or just get lazy again. But when I say something is my least favorite, it doesn't mean that... when you have a favorite author, sometimes they can write something that you just don't care for. But so far, except for some of her early writings, so far everything I've read of hers I've really loved. So when I say that Emma has remained my least favorite of her books, it still means that I love it. I just can't bring it above the other books, no matter what I do. I'm not going to go into the books as far as what they're about. If you've already there's been plenty of descriptions, so I'll try not to do too many spoilers, but there may be 1 or 2 just in reference to other books. There may be Jane Austen book spoilers, but I'm not going to spoil the other books, just that they go into Jane Austen plot developments, etc. And Emma is enjoyable. It's hilarious. You do get a lot of different character development, redemption. It is an enjoyable read. I just don't like it as much as the others. There are points at which I was really into it, and other times that I couldn't wait to get through a few chapters, and that means it's never going to be the stellar book for me. And also, I know Emma is not supposed to be the most likable of Jane Austen's main ladies, but there's just one thing she does about, respecting spreading rumors about Jane Fairfax, and they were just, to me, even though I know she feels bad about it later, it's just such a messed up thing to do that I can't get past that. But I know that doesn't really reflect on the book itself as quality. I just personally don't like that. Otherwise, it's great. It's great. I do like Mr. Knightley. I'm not terribly turned off by their age difference. I don't love it, but I've seen successful versions of it, so whatever. So yes, I still recommend Emma from the bottom of my heart. And then I read, one of the recommendations was to read a Jane Austen book that is not of the main 6 books. And so I didn't read this entire book, but I read Lady Susan. It was a reread as well, but it had been so long that I couldn't remember much of what happened. I knew it was epistolary, but I did enjoy it. I had a good laugh over it. It is one of the few times of Jane Austen's books after she, I guess, aside from her juvenilia, where the main character is just really a villain. Just Lady Susan is a terrible person. She does have friends that kind of see things her way, but she's still very manipulative of so many people. A homewrecker, a terrible parent, everything you could possibly imagine, but it's so well done, and it's wrapped up pretty well. And if you like Jane Austen, but you want something slightly spicier, maybe, this is the book for you. Totally. And so what is next? A reread of Pride and Prejudice. This is not my first reread of Pride and Prejudice. I read it many times over, but I've also kind of skimmed it many times over. But it was nice to read it again after a number of years, I think. Sorry, my eyes just get itchy every time I do videos. And I did obviously tag a lot of things. I'm doing that a lot. I just things that I forgot were in the book, I usually do, or reminders. And so again, I'm not doing my total ranking this year, but I will say that already Pride and Prejudice had been lifted up again after last year's rereading of other books. But I still say Persuasion's my favorite of Jane Austen's books. But Pride and Prejudice is such a close second that it's almost a tie. Almost. So, I mean, I just love it. It's so hard not to love. It is the Jane Austen book I recommend to anyone who hasn't read it before, because I just think it is quintessential Jane Austen. It is the whole package. The characters are the most interesting. I mean, there's interesting characters in all her books, but the way the characters respond to each other, the way the events that happen, everything is good. And this book is especially good because it has recipes, even though I didn't make any of them. So I loved it. But I'm going to tie something in with the other challenge, which was to watch adaptations. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. The other thing that you could watch was also a retelling, like a modern retelling, etc. Which this year I picked Clueless because I thought, right after I finished Emma, I watched Clueless because I wanted it to be fresh. It's it's supposed to be based on it. It's a modern retelling, so there's a lot of things they changed. There were characters they took out, but that was fine. When I say it's modern, though, I can't believe now it's been like 25 years, I think. And it's still very good, but it's so 90s. I like that because I am a 90s girl. And, I was a teenager in the 90s. It was fun. So I have no problem with it. It's very much my age range. I think, I was already out of high school when it came out, but the actress Alicia Silverstone is my age, so still relatable, and I always kind of related to people a little just slightly younger than me. And so that was good. I was gonna watch the new Emma movie, but I haven't yet. I don't know, maybe I will eventually, but I just haven't yet. There's something on my face. extricating things everywhere I go. Um, so yeah, so what I did mainly, I mean, I wanted to watch all of the movies, but I didn't because I really wanted to spend more time reading. And I watched the Pride and Prejudice adaptations. When I say that, I'm only talking about 95 and 2005. I have never seen the ones previous. Maybe I should, to be completist. I saw most of the one from like the 40s. I saw most of that a while back, and it really wasn't my thing. But it feels like they make these movies once every generation so that every generation has the one that they relate to the most. And I do feel like when I review all of the adaptations that have taken place since the 90s, I always tend to like the 90s version better. And I don't know if it's because the actors of that time are mostly of my generation, of the ones who play the main characters, so I relate to that. But it's hard to explain. So I watched because it just came on Netflix, I watched the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and then as soon as that was over, I started watching the 95 one, the miniseries, which I love so much. So I started watching it, I think it was like on a Sunday, and I think I finished it on a Monday. I don't remember exactly. And it was great. It always is. I do watch that one more than once a year, so many times, but probably a couple times a year now. I used to watch it more. I watched so many adaptations in the 90s, but because I couldn't, I didn't have cable, and that's how the 95 Pride and Prejudice was presented in the United States. I didn't watch it on television. I couldn't get a hold of it in Blockbuster Video or whatever. So, in 2005, I mean, I think I saw Bridget Jones' Diary, so I saw versions, if you could call it that. But I saw the Pride and Prejudice 2005 when it came out in the theater, and I guess I hadn't really looked. I don't remember exactly when I reread it. It was around that time, but I remembered so much. But it had been such a long time, really, since I had gone over the story, that I did enjoy it. But then a friend of mine was like, "Have you ever seen the Colin Firth?" That's what they call it, Colin Firth version. I was like, "No," and she was like, "How could you not see that?" So I finally got a hold of the DVDs, probably from the library or something, and that was just, how had I not watched it before? I knew things about it. I knew about the his shirt scene, the water scene, and that became my favorite version. Probably will always be my favorite version, unless something they make recently just somehow ends up being better, but I kind of doubt it. But yeah, I don't dislike the 2005. I just don't buy it as much because Keira Knightley is, I think, a good actress. I just don't feel her. I think Matthew McFadden, whatever his name is good. Most of Jane Rosamund Pike, I think her name is. She's good. A lot of the characters are pretty well cast, and everybody says the cinematography is good. It was. I don't dislike the movie. It just goes too fast, and Pride and Prejudice is not the longest book. You don't have to go that fast. You can make it a little bit longer. You can go into detail. I promise you, it's good to do that. But I noticed one thing about both adaptations, and this is with regards to the parents, the Bennets, and also the Gardeners. So, on my reread, I noticed that it mentions that the Bennets have been married for 23 years in the beginning, and I don't know exactly when they were married, but he basically married her for her looks, I think, not so much for gain, I don't think. But, and they used to get married pretty early in those days. Not everyone did, but a lot of them did. And so she could have gotten married as early as 18, maybe even earlier, but let's just say 18, or as late as her, mid-20s. That would be. So I'm just going to say, what if she was married around 20? So that would have been during the time of Pride and Prejudice, she should have been about 43, 44. As someone of that age, it is really weird to see oh man, names are totally getting out. But the one in 95, and Vera, she plays Vera. I finally watched all of Vera. It's a British detective show. Great actress, but she was born before my father, and it is really weird to see people in their 50s playing someone my age. It's like, why does it have to be? I mean, even if they were good, and I do love them, but it just, for me, it's just so, but I don't mind if they age up people a little bit. I know they do that. I mean, obviously Emma Thompson, but I just wish if they did, like, I'm okay now how it is. That's fine. That's how it is. But I wish that in the future, if they make another adaptation, they can get somebody. I'll play Mrs. Bennet, but I can't do the accent, so. But I'll play hysterical. I could talk about my nerves all day. Anyway, so that is weird. And the book also mentions that Mrs. Gardiner is a few years younger than Mrs. Bennet, so she's probably in her late 30s, which makes sense because her kids weren't that old. And the actresses, I think they're great, but oh my goodness. So anyway, that was one thing in both adaptations that I just don't understand. But, and in that way, I guess there some of the casting of the Bennett children was a little more realistic in 2005. But anyway, I don't knock anyone who likes 2005 better. I just, have my own preferences. So another challenge was to read like a sequel, prequel, kind of a retelling of one of Jane Austen's books, and Pride and Prejudice has most of them. I have read other ones. I found my old, I will have to do a video about this one day. I found my old list of books read in 2000 and 2001, which was an interesting time. So totally side point, but I'll probably mention it again. I noticed that I was putting the dates when I finished the books for a while there. Not the beginning, but then sometime in 2001, and then suddenly after the summer of 2001, I stopped writing it. And I think I was embarrassed that I was still reading books around 9/11. That was like, I don't want people to realize that during all that horrible time, I was still reading books. I was like, now, like almost 20 years later, I'm looking at that like, sometimes you need to read in order to get through things. And now that becomes even more understandable, so. Anyway, point being, there were two adaptations, or not adaptations, pastiches, whatever you want to call it, of Jane Austen's books. One was about the youngest sister in Sense and Sensibility, Margaret, and the other one was kind of a completed version of Sanditon, and it was written by the same author, various results. So I was reading that for a while, and then I went to a point, I guess probably around when I started watching Pride and Prejudice again. I got to a snobby point where I was like, I'm only reading pure Jane Austen. Ugh. And then I got over myself. So this is Pemberley Shades, Pride and Prejudice Continues, a lightly gothic tale of Mr. and Mrs. Darcy by D.A. Bonavia Hunt, and is very lightly gothic. Very slightly dramatic. There are characters who aren't who they seem. The back gives away a little bit too much, I think. The Darcys keep a few secrets from each other, but I think they kind of acknowledge that they're keeping secrets from each other, so it's not horrific. They need to hire a new clergyman because the Pemberley, whatever he is, what do they call them? Vicar? Rector? Oh, I can never remember. Pastor? No. Anyway, I should know this after reading so much Jane Austen stuff this past month. But anyway, he passes away, and so Mr. Collins is kind of like wanting to, maybe find his way in there. So they're looking for someone else, and the person they have as a perspective who's staying at Pemberley is a mysterious character. So that's a big part of the story, and kind of a mystery, but I wouldn't call this tea a mystery. And there are a lot of returns of people, like Georgiana Darcy, obviously. And then other people come to visit for like a big get-together, I guess. The Bingleys, Kitty Bennet, Mr. Bennet, forgetting, the Gardiners. Oh, and the de Bourghs. And so that was such a combination of people amongst this whole story. So I would recommend it. I bought it for $1 at Book Off a while back, and it was worth the risk. I wouldn't say it's the best retelling I've ever read, or sequel, I should say, but it's a good one. It's a good one. Some things were predictable, really, but it's a good one. Okay, so another challenge was to read something that was written, I think, around Jane Austen's time, like a contemporary. And I could have read poems, but I got really ambitious, so I said, I'm going to read Anne Radcliffe's, can't speak, The Mysteries of Udolpho, and I didn't really get that far. So this book is going to be a challenge for me. I'm going to keep trying to keep at it throughout the months. I just couldn't finish it for July. It was very descriptive, and I could tell it's dramatic already. It doesn't get to the point very easily. And because of, I guess, of the time, they just accepted anachronisms, you know? It's like, you know, painting people of a pastime in modern clothes. I mean, people do that now too, but you know, people used to do that a little more often. And she writes of the 1580s in France, and references are made to opera and coffee, both of which were things that were not a part of that time and place. So normally that would take me right out of the story, but I will forgive her because maybe she didn't have the resources. She couldn't fact check as much. I hope so. I'll give her that. So, and I can't say anything more about that book because I haven't gotten far enough. But the next book was read, you know, like a nonfiction about Jane Austen or her time, and I read Jane Austen, The Banker's Sister by E.J. Clary, which had its really good points. You learn a lot about finances of the time, which I have trouble understanding sometimes. And I learned a lot more about, I learned quite a lot about all of her siblings, but I learned a lot more about Henry Austen this time, because that's mainly the brother that they talk about the most. And you know, I learned some new things about Jane Austen, but most of the things I knew already. I liked, because I miss London still, and I wish I would have gone this year, but it was kind of fun to read about one place that Henry Austen lived at one point that Jane Austen used to visit her brother, and it was right near the Wagamama that I went to near Covent Garden. You know, that's a weird thing. We have Wagamama in New York, and it made me sick when I went there, so I don't really go there anymore, but it was just kind of a weird side point for me. I would say this should not be your first Jane Austen nonfiction. It would be, if you like to read about all things Jane Austen, then sure, pick it up. But understand she gets a little bit odd about Jane Austen's relationship with her brother Henry. That was a little too, like, they were a little too close. And I was like, no, I don't feel that. No. Because she wouldn't say that about Cassandra. So anyway, but I still thought it was good. Let's see. So then I read a few, I call them my little extras, you know, still all nonfiction, but not, you know, just extras. This was a reread. Two guys read Jane Austen. They read Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice, and they write emails to each other during the months that they do so, around 2007 and I think early 2008. And if that's your kind of thing, then it's a great book. There was a lot of interesting insights in here. You know, the male version, you know, the male perspective, I should say. And so if you're a guy and you're like, should I be reading Jane Austen? Well, yes, but read this too. If you get a hold of it, you may, you know, be interested in such dialogue. I read Camp Austen. This was recommended to me on Amazon algorithms, and it was My Life as an Accidental Jane Austen Superfan by Ted Scheinman. He goes to like a camp revolving around Jane Austen. He plays Darcy sometimes, and his mother was supposed to be there, but she had knee surgery, so he's kind of taking her place in certain things. It's a quick tale with a little bit of talk about fandom itself, so it is good, but sometimes, first of all, there wasn't, to me, enough about the camp situation itself and what went on, in my opinion, and sometimes I felt he was not exactly looking down, but kind of looking bemusedly, that's not the word, amusedly probably, and slightly a hipster vibe for me. So I didn't love it, but it was cheap and quick, so it was okay. Last but not least, this was the newest book I read. This is Austen Years, a memoir in 5 novels by Rachel Cohen. So my problem already is 5 novels. There's 6. She kind of denies, even though she discusses it a little bit, she denies Northanger Abbey because apparently Jane Austen didn't want it to be published or something. But it was published and it was a complete novel. Give me a break. But it's very persuasion heavy, which I have no problem with. She wrote it shortly after losing her father, so I identify with grief, you know. Having lost parents, it's a terrible feeling, and sometimes there are ways of coping, and she also had children around that time, and so it's, you know, raising children, dealing with grief, meanwhile reading nothing but Jane Austen novels and memoirs. So here's a memoir as a result. So it was good. A little disjointed. Some things, like it mentions her moving in the flyleaf. It mentions that she went to Chicago. They moved to Chicago to live, and I know it's supposed to be eventually. It was toward the end of the book, but I was kind of like, she mentions it in a paragraph, and I'm like, well, why even talk about it in the description if there's really nothing about that? I think she meant to finish it around 2005 and then just added more. And 2015, sorry. And it's still good. But I did think that it was a little bit, sometimes all over the place. When I say all over the place, not all over the place, but just kind of, okay, about her, and then again about Jane Austen and her novels mostly. But I still think it was one of the better. It was a good read. I do recommend it. I don't know if I needed to read it brand new. I probably could have waited a little longer. But there was one interesting point that she brought out. Well, speculation, really. But I like speculation anyway. And it talked about how in Emma, Mr. Knightley and Miss Bates had a certain understanding when they talked to each other, the way she would defer to him in certain ways. And there was like a thought of, well, they may have been around the same age, and do you think they may have had a previous possible relationship? And it was like, again, nothing can be proven, but it did add a little question mark to my opinions of Emma when I was reading it. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I mean, I read this after I read Emma, so it was kind of like retroactive. But I mean, I could spend all day reading all the little tags, but obviously we're getting way too close to half an hour here. So that was all I read. That's all she read for July, and I still have the Jane Austen mystery I haven't finished yet either. We'll see if I can finish that in August. We don't know. So let me know if you guys participated in Jane Austen July, what you thought about it, what your thoughts on these books are, if you've read them or if you want to read them, if you share my opinions or not. And if you like talking about Jane Austen and other things, please subscribe. So that's all for now. This is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea, book, and Jane Austen-filled day and month and year. Bye.